We start this week with the race for lieutenant governor in our state. The primary runoff election will be held on May 26, and Democrats need to choose a candidate to challenge the Republican incumbent, Dan Patrick. State Representative Vikki Goodwin was the top vote getter in the March primary, but she didn't receive the 50% plus one to win the race outright. So instead, now she will face Labor leader Marcos Velez, who received 31% of the vote. Iowa politics reporter Jack Fink sat down with the candidates to talk about their strategy for the primary runoff election. We begin with Vikki Goodwin.
And when I tell people that I got the endorsement of the 5 major newspapers for my experience, that I have run for office before, flipped my House seat in 2018, and have served 4 terms in the Texas legislature, building a lot of relationships with other House members and senators, most people understand that experience is really going to be relevant when I step into the lieutenant governor role.
Let me ask you, because there was a 3rd candidate in the race on March 3rd, what are you doing to support Courtney Head's supporters?
I think she earned a lot of her support through social media, and so I too have been working hard to reach out to let people of all ages know that I want to make Texas a better place economically. Her issues really, I think, were the same as mine, but her focus was we need more representation for young people. And as I travel around this state, one of the issues is affordability, in particular housing affordability. And so I talk about the fact that I tried to work on putting downward pressure on rent prices through a bill that I had last session, tried to expand an existing program called Texas Homes for Heroes to allow for down payment assistance and low interest rate loans for teachers and first responders, and just things that would help younger people in the state of Texas.
And you talked a little bit before, but what are your biggest contrasts with Velez? Because voters are going to have to decide between the two of you, whether it be policy or experience, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's putting a focus on raising the minimum wage, which I have actually filed a bill to raise the minimum wage all 4 sessions that I've been in the legislature, and I haven't ever seen him come to my office to advocate to help on that bill. So my issues are also economic, but I believe that by having a strong public education system, that provides those economic opportunities for people. And so my number one issue has been to increase spending to public schools, to end the voucher scam, to help people with their health care. You know, we have a broken healthcare system, and I don't know if he talks about that as one of his higher issues. Really, when I've heard him speak, he mainly focuses on raising the minimum wage. And I think that's important too, but I think there's a lot of really important issues that impact people in their daily lives, and healthcare is one of them.
You talked a little bit about healthcare and public schools. So how would you go about improving healthcare in the state of Texas?
So we just came out with some information about Texas having the highest rate of maternal mortality. That is just unacceptable. And a lot of Black women in particular lose their lives from pregnancy-related issues. We should have better understanding of why that is and then address the problem. We have a lot of people in Texas. In fact, Texas has the highest rate of uninsured who don't have the ability to go see a doctor, and they put it off because they're afraid of that expense. So they may put it off until they end up in the emergency room, and that's where care is most expensive and where the outcomes aren't as good. So we need to make sure people have the opportunity to go see a doctor when they need to see a doctor and make it affordable. So if they don't have employer coverage, there should be a state plan. I know a lot of people ask me about expanding Medicaid, and I would be for that, but there are a lot of issues with Medicaid expansion too. You know, doctors say that the reimbursement rate doesn't cover their cost of care, that oftentimes they aren't reimbursed for months on end, and sometimes that money is clawed back. And so why not come up with a Texas plan that serves the people of Texas?
And so have you any other ideas as how you develop that, where, you know, it's not Medicaid because of the problems that you just raised, but you know, what do you think could work? What have you heard?
Well, I think talking to doctors and people that have worked on healthcare issues is important, bringing in nurses and then consumers too. But also, I recently had the opportunity to bring in a man who started a new health insurance company in Texas. His does focus on employer-based health coverage. But his ideas are good and could be useful for creating that Texas plan.
Well, now Jack goes one-on-one with Marcos Velez.
We had a very short amount of time to build support for the campaign. And so we campaigned really hard in areas where Democrats have been unsuccessful. Now we've expanded our focus, and we're spending more time in the big cities, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, but obviously not forgetting the RGV and the Panhandle.
There was a third candidate in the race, Courtney Head. What are you doing to attract her voters?
We're actually working with Courtney Head. Courtney endorsed me. Very honored to earn her endorsement, and so we're collaborating with her as we move forward.
What is your game plan now I know you talked a little bit about it before, but as far as your messaging, as far as your issues?
Look, our messaging is not going to change. I think that we're going to continue to campaign on a message of economic populism, raising wages, expanding opportunities, lowering costs. Those are things that matter to Texans right now. I think those are the most pressing issues in this race, and we're going to continue to lean into that messaging because it's where our values lie.
You talked a little bit before about being endorsed by Courtney Head. Because people always like to know, the endorsements. Who else has endorsed you?
We've been endorsed by labor organizations. We've been endorsed by organizations that represent the LGBTQ plus community. We've been endorsed by candidates like Colin Allred. And so I think it says that we're building a powerful grassroots campaign that is attracting the interest of everyday working people who are tired of establishment politicians. But we're also endorsed and earning the respect of candidates that have progressive values because they understand that a campaign like ours is one that benefits working people.
What are your biggest contrasts with Representative Goodwin?
I think lived experience. I have a heavy focus on the realities for middle class, working class people because I am one. I always tell people, very proud to be the lowest net worth candidate in the race, and I think that keeps me grounded in reality. I think one of the problems is Austin is not Texas, and so if we're unsuccessful in our bid, you're going to have a very Austin heavy ticket. I think when you look at your average everyday Texan, they don't identify with what goes on in Austin. They identify with their portion of the state. I think Houston, being one of the most diverse cities within the state, is a good representation of the needs of many Texans, but also the fact that I work all over the state, it keeps me grounded and connected to people in small towns like Claude or Harper or Mountain Home, all the way to the big cities like Houston and Dallas.
So you're running as an outsider?
Definitely an outsider.
But as far as her legislative experience, she has talked a lot about her legislative experience being there working in the House and then also with senators to pass legislation. Does that concern you that that's something that voters will want?
I don't think it concerns me at all because when you look at the role of the lieutenant governor is more primarily a negotiator. I'm a professional negotiator. I do that every single day with an organized labor against heavy corporate interests, the same interests that we're going to be fighting against in the Texas Senate. If I was running for a position within the Texas House, I believe that legislative experience would be more important. But when you look at what's needed within the lieutenant governor's office, we need someone that understands the needs of working Texans, the struggles of working Texans, that's going to prioritize legislation that benefits working Texans.
Such as?
Raising the state minimum wage, expanding affordable housing. I mean, I could go on and on. Look, better funding for teachers, better funding for our public schools, making sure that we give teachers the right to collectively bargain, things that would actually improve the living standards for normal everyday Texans.
You listed a whole bunch of topics, but I'm wondering if you had to choose your top 2 or 3 priorities, what are they?
My number one priority is always going to be raising the state minimum wage. Even if you don't make minimum wage, your employer keeps a certain gap between what you earn and what the minimum wage is. And so a rising tide lifts all boats. If we can raise wages, that'll combat some of these soaring costs. And then obviously when you look at a strong number 2, we have to make sure that we properly fund education. The public school system's in a disarray. It's really a disservice to our teachers. They're educators, they go into a profession, they should earn a living wage, they should have the resource they need to teach. They shouldn't be persecuted by the state because they deviate from some plan that the state has laid out. And then third is healthcare access. We have way too many Texans that are suffering from a lack of access to health care, a lack of health insurance. I have people within my own family that are suffering the ill effects of that. And so I think it's really important that we focus on those 3 issues.
And of course, the winner will face incumbent Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who easily cruised to the victory in the March Republican primary election. Patrick is hoping to capture his 4th term now in office.